Akamili was Adaora's world, but it felt like a cage. The air itself seemed heavy, thick with unspoken judgments and the weight of traditions that bound women tightly. Every sunrise brought the same suffocating silence, the same unending chores, the same feeling of being watched. She moved through her days with a quiet ache in her heart, a longing for something more, something beyond the dusty paths of the village. The ancient Iroquois trees seemed to whisper secrets of endurance, but offered no escape. She often found herself gazing at the horizon, dreaming of a place where she could finally breathe freely, a place where her spirit would not feel so confined by expectations. Her life was woven with the threads of her 5 daughters. 5 precious girls. Their small faces a mixture of childhood innocence and a dawning awareness of life's complexities. They clung to her, their eyes reflecting both a fragile hope for the future. Adaora held them close, her love a fierce protective shield against the harshness of their world. She saw herself in their questioning glances, in their quiet resilience. Their laughter was a rare melody in the otherwise somber symphony of her existence in Akamili, a reminder of what truly mattered amidst the struggles. Obina, her husband, was a man of loud pronouncements and shadowed moods. He was the one who decided their fate, his words carrying the weight of undisputed authority within their home. One afternoon, he declared they were leaving Akamili. He spoke of better opportunities in a bustling city called Aba. He painted a picture of a fresh start, a place where prosperity awaited them. Adaora listened, her face impassive, but her heart knew the hollowness of his words. She understood that his reasons were more complex, more troubled than the simple pursuit of future for his family. The truth, Adaora knew, was that Obina sought an escape. He wanted to flee the relentless whispers of the village, the gossip that clung to their family like the harmattan dust. But she also knew with a chilling certainty that some demons could not be outrun. They were not rooted in the soil of Akamili, but in the recesses of their shared life, in the unspoken tensions that simmered beneath the surface. Moving to a new city might change the scenery, but the old shadows, she feared, would inevitably follow them, casting their long dark shapes over any new beginning. The announcement came suddenly, disrupting the monotonous rhythm of their lives. Obina's decision to move to Aba was not a discussion, it was a decree. The name Aba hung in the air, unfamiliar and distant, a symbol of an abrupt severing from all they had ever known. Adaora felt a tremor of apprehension, the kind that comes before a storm. The city was a mystery, a place of unknown challenges and uncertain promises. She had no say in the matter, only the duty to pack their lives and follow where her husband led, into a future she could not yet envision clearly. Adaora understood Obina's desperation, even if he never voiced it. She saw past his bluster and his claims of seeking fortune. Akamili had become a prison of pointing fingers and harsh condemnations, largely due to the societal pressure of not having a son. This move was his way of shedding an old skin, of trying to outrun the judgment that had become his constant companion. Yet, Adaora's heart was heavy. She sensed that a change of location would not magically erase the deep-seated issues that plagued their marriage and their peace of mind. The city might offer anonymity, but not necessarily solace. The day of departure arrived too quickly. Their meager belongings were bundled and squeezed into the worn-out family car. The 5 girls, their small bodies pressed together, looked out at their disappearing village with wide, uncertain eyes. Hope mingled with fear on their young faces, a poignant reflection of Adaora's own conflicted emotions. The journey was long and uncomfortable. The silence in the car punctuated only by the rumble of the old engine and the occasional sigh. Each mile carried them further from the familiar, deeper into an uncertain new chapter of their lives. Adaora held her youngest daughter tightly in her arms, whispering soft words of reassurance she herself did not fully feel. She spoke of a better life, of new schools and exciting city sights, painting a picture of hope for the child nestled against her. These promises were a fragile shield against the anxieties that churned within her. As the car rattled onwards towards Aba, Adaora braced herself. The city loomed ahead, not as a haven she imagined, but as another challenging terrain where she would have to fight for her children's future and her own survival against odds that already felt overwhelmingly stacked against her. Aba was a cacophony of sounds, a stark contrast to the hushed rhythms of Akamili. The city did not welcome them with open arms. It swallowed them whole. Horns blared incessantly, traders shouted their wares, and the sheer press of humanity was overwhelming. Adaora felt a profound sense of displacement, a feeling that they had merely exchanged one form of confinement for another, noisier one. The air, thick with the smells of exhaust fumes and unfamiliar street food, burned her nostrils. This was not the promised land Obina had spoken of. It was a concrete jungle, indifferent to their hopes and struggles. Their new home was a cramped apartment on the chaotic outskirts of Aba. The walls were thin, offering little solace from the relentless noise of the streets or the lives of their unseen neighbors. 5 growing girls and 2 adults jostled for space in rooms that felt too small to breathe, let alone dream. The hope that had flickered in her daughter's eyes during the journey began to dim, replaced by a quiet weariness. Privacy became a forgotten luxury. The discomfort was a constant, unwelcome companion, seeping into their bones and fraying their nerves, making every day a battle for simple peace. Obina's promised better opportunities seemed to evaporate upon their arrival. The city's aggressive pace did not suit his temperament, and his moods, already prone to darkness, grew stormier within the confines of their small apartment. He paced the rooms like a caged animal, his frustration a palpable force. The fresh start he envisioned was proving elusive, and the weight of his disappointment fell heavily on Adaora and the children. He found little work, and the little he found he often lost quickly, his pride clashing with the demands of city employers. Despite the unsettling new environment, Adaora tried to anchor her family. She unpacked their few belongings, attempting to carve out a semblance of order from the chaos. She focused on the children, her love a constant in their turbulent new world. She cooked their meals, told them stories, and tried to shield them from the worst of Obina's growing bitterness. An internal resolve began to solidify within her. She knew this city, with its harsh embrace, would demand more from her than Akamili ever had. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for the 5 young lives looking to her for guidance. Just as a fragile routine began to take root, Madame Ezina descended upon them. She did not come with them to Abba initially, but her visits soon became a dreaded fixture. Her arrivals were often unannounced, shattering the delicate peace Adaora painstakingly tried to build. Madame Ezine's presence was like a storm cloud, casting a long, oppressive shadow over their cramped living space. She brought with her the old judgments, the familiar criticisms, proving that some shadows indeed followed them from Akamili. The city's anonymity offered no shield from her piercing gaze and relentless scrutiny. Madame Ezine surveyed their small apartment with undisguised disdain. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, tongue in disapproval, her silence often more damning than her words. She made no secret of her belief that Abba was no better for her son, especially with Adaora still by his side. Her visits were not of support, but of inspection, of reaffirming her dominion over her son's household and her disapproval of his wife. Every corner of their home felt judged under her watchful eye. During one such visit, her words were particularly venomous. "She's not good enough for my son," Madame Ezine sneered, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear through the thin walls. She eyed Adaora's tired wrapper, the lines of exhaustion etched on her face. "A woman who only bears daughters is useless. He deserves better. He needs a son to carry his name." The old refrain, the one that had haunted Adaora for years, was resurrected with fresh cruelty in this new city, a constant reminder of her perceived failings. These verbal assaults cut deeper than any physical blow. Adaora had learned to endure Obina's temper, but Madame Ezine's words targeted her very worth as a woman, as a wife, as a mother. They chipped away at her spirit, leaving her feeling exposed and inadequate. The hope that Abba might offer a reprieve from such pointed societal pressure withered under her mother-in-law's relentless attacks. It seemed that no matter where they went, she could not escape the suffocating expectations and the judgment that came with failing to meet them. Madame Ezine did not confine her criticisms to Adaora's hearing alone. She began to plant insidious seeds in Obina's mind. During her visits, and likely in phone calls Adaora never heard, she spoke persistently about the necessity of a son. She whispered suggestions of Obina taking a second wife, someone fertile enough, she implied, to give him the male heir that Adaora had supposedly failed to provide. The societal pressure for a son, amplified by his mother's relentless voice, began to weigh heavily on Obina's already troubled mind, feeding his frustrations. Adaora soon became acutely aware of these brewing machinations. She heard the hushed conversations between Obina and his mother, the careful, carefully chosen words that nonetheless conveyed their meaning. She saw the cold, appraising glances exchanged in the market square when she went to buy food, or in the shared compound when other women gathered. The community, always quick to echo traditional sentiments, seemed to absorb Madame Esine's views. Rumors began to circulate. Whispers that Obina was considering his options, that Adaora's position in her own home was becoming increasingly precarious. Obina's demeanor towards Adaora grew perceptibly colder, more distant. He became more critical, his words often echoing his mother's sentiments. The fragile patience he sometimes showed with the girls thinned, replaced by an irritable impatience. The unspoken tension in their small apartment thickened until it was almost unbearable. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, fueled by his mother's recent visit and his own mounting frustrations, Obina's anger exploded. He seized Adaora's favorite cooking pot, a small symbol of her domestic efforts, and hurled it against the wall with a crash. "Maybe your womb is the problem," he spat, his face contorted with rage. "Maybe I need a woman who can carry my legacy, a real woman." Tears blurred Adaora's vision, stinging her eyes, but she stood her ground, refusing to crumble under the onslaught. "I am your wife," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "I carried your children." Her words hung heavy in the oppressive air, a quiet testament to her endurance. But the threat of a second wife, now openly voiced, lingered like a gathering storm cloud, dark and ominous, over their fractured home. Then, one miraculous morning, a change began within Adaora. It started subtly, a shift in her body's rhythm, a new kind of weariness interwoven with a strange, fluttering sensation. After months of quiet sickness, a secret she held close to her heart, and a hope too fragile to voice, she knew she was pregnant again. This realization was not met with the same dread as before. Instead, a delicate bud of hope, tentative yet persistent, began to unfurl within her spirit. This time it felt different. This time it felt like a whisper from the divine, a silent promise amidst the storm of her life. She carried this secret knowledge carefully, a precious ember she shielded from the harsh winds of her reality. The early days were a trial of morning sickness and profound fatigue, yet Adaora navigated them with a newfound, quiet determination. She observed the changes in herself with a mix of anxiety and a burgeoning, almost defiant optimism. Each passing day that the pregnancy held felt like a small victory against the despair that had long been her companion. This was not just another child. This was a possibility, a chance for a different narrative to be written for her family. When she finally chose to tell Obina, the words came out softly, almost lost in the usual tension of their small apartment. He was quieter than usual, his typical bluster momentarily subdued. Adaora watched him closely, searching his face for a sign. There was no joyous outburst, no immediate embrace. But something in his eyes shifted, a flicker she had not seen before. Was it respect? Or perhaps, she wondered, a sliver of fear. He said little, but the silence that followed was not entirely empty. It held a new, uncertain weight. The months that followed were a period of cautious endurance. Adaora nurtured the life within her with every fiber of her being. She endured the familiar aches, the persistent nausea, and the sleepless nights that pregnancy brought. Yet, this time, an undercurrent of cautious optimism buoyed her spirits. She ate what little nourishing food she could find, protecting this tiny, growing hope. She prayed silently, not for riches or an easy life, but for strength and for this child to be a turning point. This pregnancy was her quiet rebellion, her silent prayer. The day of reckoning arrived, with the undeniable pains of labor. It was a long, arduous process, each contraction a wave pulling her deeper into the struggle, yet also closer to the unknown outcome. The cramped room in their Abba apartment felt even smaller, filled with her hushed moans and the anxious energy of her older daughters. Adaora focused inward, drawing on a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed. She was fighting not just to bring a child into the world, but fighting for her own future, for a chance to reclaim her dignity. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with unspoken fears and fragile hopes. And then it happened. A final, powerful push. And the silence was shattered by a sound that reverberated through the very foundations of their lives. It was a strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. In that instant, the exhaustion, the pain, the years of suffering seemed to recede. A wave of profound relief washed over Adaora. The midwife, a kind woman from their neighborhood, smiled broadly. "It is a boy," she announced, her voice gentle but clear. "A son." The words hung in the air, potent and transformative. Adaora's heart swelled, tears of joy finally breaking free, tracing paths down her weary face. They named him Ifeanyi. Nothing is impossible with God. The name was a testament, a declaration of faith in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a name that spoke of miracles, of hope, resurrected from the ashes of despair. When Obinna held the child for the first time, his usually stern face softened. He cradled the tiny infant close. His eyes, which had so often held anger or indifference towards Adaora, now held a different light. "Our son," he whispered, the words raspy, almost reverent. It was a simple phrase, yet it carried the weight of a new beginning. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a tentative peace settled over Adaora. It was a fragile peace, like the first light of dawn after a long, violent storm, but it was undeniably there. The birth of Ifeanyi had shifted something fundamental within their small world. The oppressive atmosphere in the apartment seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder. Obinna's harsh edges appeared for the moment to have been smoothed by the tiny, helpless presence of his son. Adaora looked at her baby, a profound sense of accomplishment warming her from within. Madame Ezin's visit to the hospital, or rather their small room where Adaora recovered, was inevitable. She arrived with her usual air of authority, but as she peered at the sleeping infant, her voice trembled slightly. A different emotion colored her tone, one Adaora had never heard directed towards her or her accomplishments. At last, Madame Ezina declared, her words laced with a proud satisfaction that was almost unnerving. At last, the family line will continue. Adaora listened, her own heart a complex mix of relief and a lingering weariness. She knew this pride was not for her, but for the son she had borne. Obina's demeanor continued to show subtle but significant changes. The flicker of respect, or perhaps fear, the Adaora had initially perceived in his eyes when she announced the pregnancy began to solidify into something more tangible. He spent hours just looking at Ifeanyi, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he learned to hold his son. He spoke to Adaora with a newfound, hesitant consideration. The aggressive posture he usually adopted around her seemed to deflate, replaced by a quieter, more contemplative mood. The birth of a son had evidently altered his perception of her and perhaps of himself. The constant, suffocating threat of a second wife, which had loomed over Adaora like a dark spectre, began to recede. The whispers in the compound and the marketplace, which had once been sharp with judgment and speculation, started to soften, then gradually faded into silence. The birth of Ifeanyi had, in the eyes of their community, validated Adaora's position, diffusing the primary source of Madame Ezina's ammunition against her. The pressure that had been relentless for so many years finally began to ease its grip. The road ahead was still uncertain. The deep scars of the past, the years of neglect, the emotional and verbal abuse, the profound shame would not simply vanish overnight. Yet, in this crowded room in Aba, surrounded by her daughters, and now her precious son, she felt a fragile but undeniable claim to her home, to her life. This feeling stemmed not from the world's sudden acceptance, but from the fierce knowledge that she had endured. She had survived. And at last, she held a tangible piece of her own, hard-won happiness in her arms. The birth of Ifeanyi was indeed a turning point. It was not just about the continuation of Obina's lineage, a concern that had tormented their lives for so long. More profoundly, it became a pivotal moment for Adaora herself, a quiet dawn after a seemingly endless night. For the first time in her marriage, her voice began to carry a discernible weight within the household. Obina, who had always been cold, distant, and often cruel, now looked at her with a new expression. It was a complex mixture of nascent respect and a subtle, unfamiliar caution, as if seeing her fully for the first time. Madame Ezina's intrusive visits became less frequent. Her pronouncements, once so sharp and damaging, lost some of their venomous power. The looming ever-present threat of Obina taking a second wife, a fear that had haunted Adaora's waking hours and shadowed her dreams, slowly started to dissolve. It did not vanish entirely, but it receded into the background like a storm that had finally passed, leaving behind a fragile, tentative silence. Adaora knew this newfound peace was delicate, easily broken. She understood that this small window of opportunity, this slight shift in the dynamics of her home, was precious. Adaora did not let this fragile power lie dormant. She did not bask in the temporary reprieve. Instead, with a quiet, steely determination that had been forged in the fires of her suffering, she began to plan. Her mind, once consumed with surviving each day, now turned towards building a future she could control, a future for her children. A few months after Ifeanyi was born, while the household still adjusted to the new rhythm, Adaora started to save. She saved every single kobo she could meticulously muster, a secret hoard growing day by day. The money came from small, tireless efforts. She cooked extra meals, her delicious egusi soup and jollof rice, finding eager buyers among their neighbors. She utilized her skills in sewing, mending clothes for women in the compound, and stitching new wrappers. She remembered the herbal remedies her own mother had taught her, preparing and selling them quietly. Finally, after months of painstaking saving and careful consideration, she took a bold, courageous step. Adaora rented a small, unassuming stall in Ariaria Market, specifically in G-Line, a bustling, vibrant artery of Aba, where commerce thrived and fortunes were made. At first, Adaora's stall in Ariaria Market was a humble affair. She began with simple things, items she knew well and could source reliably. She sold aromatic spices, their rich scents mingling with the market air. She offered bags of ground nuts, roasted to perfection. She displayed colorful local fabrics, their patterns telling stories of tradition and artistry. But Adaora possessed a keen eye for quality and an even keener understanding of what people needed. Her tireless work ethic, quiet diligence that had always defined her, soon began to transform her small venture into something more substantial. She quickly built a reputation, not through loud advertising, but through her steadfast character. Honesty became her trademark. Customers knew her prices were fair, her measures true. The quality of her goods spoke for itself, fresh and carefully selected. Perhaps most importantly, Adaora offered a genuine friendliness, a warm smile, and a patient ear to everyone who stopped by her stall. Word of this new market woman, the one in G-Line, who was both fair and kind, began to spread like wildfire through the sprawling marketplace, carried on the lips of satisfied customers. Customers started to come not only from their immediate neighborhood, but from across the vast expanse of Ariaria Market. Women journeying from other parts of Aba made it a point to seek out her stall. Adaora's small space became more than just a point of transaction. It evolved into a hub. It became a place where women gathered, not just to buy, but to exchange stories, to share laughter and burdens, to find a moment of camaraderie amidst the daily grind. Adaora, in her quiet way, fostered this sense of community. Meanwhile, Obina's own business ventures, often ill-conceived and poorly managed, continued to stumble and fail. He seemed to lack the discipline or the foresight that Adaora possessed in abundance. More of his time was spent at the local palm wine bar, complaining about his misfortunes and gambling away whatever meager profits he occasionally made. As Adaora's small business steadily flourished, growing stronger with each passing month, Obina's prospects dwindled, casting his failures into sharper relief against her burgeoning success. The contrast between their paths became increasingly stark. Within 2 short, transformative years, the reality of their financial situation had dramatically shifted. Adaora, the woman once deemed useless for bearing only daughters, was now richer than her husband. The profits from her thriving market stall far outstripped any income Obina managed to bring home. With her earnings, she brought tangible changes to their family's life. She bought new, well-fitting clothes for all her children, their faces beaming with pride. She paid for much-needed repairs to their cramped apartment, making it a more comfortable, dignified space to live. Most significantly, Adaora made sure her older girls were enrolled in school, giving them the education she herself had been denied. This was her quiet revolution, investing in their futures, empowering them with knowledge. When Obina, increasingly resentful of her success, complained about money or made demands, Adaora no longer cowered. She met his grievances calmly, her voice steady. "I carry this family now," she would remind him, her words not boastful, but factual. "I carry this family not just with my womb, as you once wished, but with my work, with these hands." Obina grumbled, his pride deeply wounded by this undeniable shift in their circumstances. He muttered his discontent, but the violence in his words and actions began to lessen. He no longer raised his hand to her with the same terrifying frequency. His shouts, though still present, lacked their former conviction. Adaora's confidence, nurtured by her hard-won independence and the respect she earned daily in the market, continued to grow. She began to challenge him more openly, not with anger or aggression, but with a quiet, unshakable strength that he found increasingly difficult to counter. One evening, as they sat down for their evening meal, Obina, in his old imperious tone, demanded she prepare his favorite dish immediately, despite her obvious exhaustion from a long day at the market. "I'm tired of doing everything around here," he grumbled, expecting her usual compliance. Adaora looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "If you want respect, Obina," she said, her voice low but firm, "then you must start by respecting me. I am your wife, and I am the mother of your children. We are meant to build this family together, not with one person serving the other." Obina was stunned into silence, but Obina saw her assent as his own personal dissent. Each kobo she earned felt like a coin taken from his pride. Her growing reputation was a mirror reflecting his own stagnation. He had once been the undisputed head of the household. Now he felt like a forgotten relic in a home that buzzed with her energy. His own ventures had crumbled to dust, one after another. The palm wine bar became his only solace, his bitter drink fueling his even bitterer resentment. He could not celebrate her light. He could only curse the shadow it cast upon him. His attacks began subtly, like a slow-acting poison. Sarcastic remarks about her important business would lace their evening meals. He would countermand her instructions to the children. A petty display of his fading authority. He belittled her achievements to any relatives who visited their home, painting her success as neglect. "She is never here," he would sigh dramatically. The market has become her true husband. He sought to chip away at the respect she commanded, starting within the very walls she had painstakingly repaired and beautified. His bitterness then found a more insidious outlet. He started to weave tales, not just for the children, but for anyone who would lend an ear. He hinted at improprieties, at a hidden cost for her success. A woman alone in the market all day, he'd muse with a knowing look. One must wonder what else she trades. These were not yet direct accusations for the public, but calculated seeds of doubt. He aimed to tarnish her shine, to pull her back down into the misery that had become his constant companion. Obinna was unraveling, and he was determined to take Adaora with him. The children were not immune to the chilling winds blowing through their home. Chimamanda, now a young woman, saw the growing chasm between her parents. The younger girls, once so quick to run to their mother with stories and laughter, became more hesitant. They sensed the unspoken war. They felt the tension in Obinna's sharp tones and Adaora's weary sighs. Their home, once a noisy haven Adaora had built, was now laced with an uncomfortable, heavy silence whenever Obinna was present. They were caught in a battle they did not understand. Obinna's whispers grew bolder, more direct, aimed straight at their innocent hearts. "Your mother cares more for her market stall than for any of you," he would tell them when Adaora was away. "She is too busy counting her money to be a proper mother." He would sneer. "She thinks she is a man now. With all her running around, a good wife stays home." He poisoned their minds against the very person who worked tirelessly for their well-being, for their schooling, for their future. He twisted her sacrifices into accusations of abandonment and unfeminine ambition. Adaora saw the confusion clouding her children's eyes, the flicker of doubt where unquestioning love once resided. It was a pain sharper than any insult from Obinna or his mother. Her heart ached with a profound sorrow. She tried to counteract his poison with unwavering love and patience. She would gather them close, her voice gentle, explaining her work not as a choice over them, but a necessity for them. She never spoke ill of their father to them. She believed truth, lived consistently, would eventually shine through the darkness of his lies. But the seeds of doubt took root in some of them. Chimamanda became quiet. Her earlier warmth towards Adaora tinged with a new reserve. The second daughter, Nkechi, sometimes avoided her gaze. The younger ones, Ifeanyi included, would ask unsettling questions, echoing Obinna's very words. "Mama, does Daddy not like it when you go to the market?" The precious unity of her family, the one thing she cherished above all, was beginning to fray under the relentless assault of her husband's envy. It was a heavy burden to bear. Obinna's bitterness, no longer contained within their apartment, began to seep into the wider community. He found sympathetic ears amongst other idle men at the drinking spots. He complained loudly of his disobedient and overly ambitious wife. He painted himself as a wronged husband, overshadowed and disrespected. His narrative played into traditional views held by some, views that were wary of women who stepped too far beyond prescribed roles. He knew how to manipulate these sentiments to garner pity and stoke suspicion against Adaora. Slowly, insidiously, rumors began to circulate through the bustling pathways of Ariaria Market and the surrounding neighborhoods. They were whispers at first, like the rustle of dry leaves. That Adaora, she has changed, some would say. Too much money can spoil a woman. Envy, a common currency in places of striving, mixed with outdated beliefs. A woman cannot become so successful so quickly without others would suggest their voices low, their eyes darting. The source of the whispers was often murky, but their intent was clear: to diminish her, to question her character. Adaora, with her keen senses honed by years of navigating difficult terrains, felt the subtle shift. Some acquaintances who once greeted her warmly now offered only a curt nod. She overheard snippets of conversations that fell silent as she approached. Older women, perhaps friends of Mademoiselle, would offer unsolicited advice laden with innuendo about a wife's proper place. The air around her, once filled with admiration, now sometimes carried a chill of judgment. The societal backlash, subtle at first, was beginning to manifest. A new shadow on her hard-won success. Despite these undercurrents, Adaora held her head high. She continued her work with the same diligence and integrity. Her stall remained a beacon of quality and fair dealing. Her true customers, those who valued her for who she was, remained loyal. Yet the whispers were a constant hum beneath the market's vibrant noise. They were a reminder that success, for a woman like her, often came with a heavy price. The triumph of her business was undeniable, but its taste was now tinged with a new, unforeseen bitterness. The storm clouds were gathering. Adaora heard Obina's ultimatum, the Igwe, the oath, Umudim. Her blood ran cold for a moment, the ancient fear of such rituals touching her. But then a deeper calm settled. She was not afraid of the truth. Her hands were clean. Her heart, though bruised by slander, was pure in this matter. She would go. She would swear. She would let the spirits of her ancestors bear witness. This accusation, so vile and baseless, would be met not with hiding, but with courage. She would stand before her people and reclaim her name, no matter the cost. The journey back to Umudim was heavy with unspoken things. As the car bumped along the familiar red earth roads, memories flooded Adaora. Memories of her girlhood, of laughter under the mango trees, of her father's kind eyes. Now she returned under a cloud of shame, falsely accused. Yet a quiet resolve solidified within her. She was no longer the timid girl who had left. Abba had forged her. Her business had taught her strength. Her children's love was her armor. She would face this trial. She would not break. They arrived at the Igwe's compound. A crowd had already gathered. The air was thick with anticipation, with hushed whispers. Adaora saw Madame Ezine's eyes, alight with a cruel triumph. Obinna strutted slightly, puffed up with the certainty of his impending victory. He believed his lies would be her undoing. Adaora scanned the faces, expecting to see the old, frail Igwe, who had presided over village matters for decades. She braced herself for the ordeal, her gaze steady, her spirit prepared for the confrontation. But the man who stepped forward, who stood under the shade of the ancient tree in the royal courtyard, was not the old king. He was tall, robed in pristine white agbada, an eagle-feathered staff of authority grasped firmly in his hand. Adaora's breath caught in her throat. Her world tilted. It was Chuka, the boy whose heart had once beaten for hers, the man who had tried to defend her honor years ago. Now he was Igwe Chuka of Umudim, the ultimate arbiter of her fate. His eyes met hers across the silent crowd, a flicker of ancient pain, then a profound regal calm. The ceremony began with solemn gravity. The elders chanted. The air grew heavy with the scent of tradition and spiritual power. The diviner brought forth the sacred calabash, its contents hidden, its power palpable. Adaora stepped forward, her white wrapper stuck against the red earth. She was guided through the ancient words of the oath, her voice clear and unwavering. She swore her innocence regarding Chief Otumba, regarding any man. She swore her fidelity to her marriage despite its deep fractures. Her hand did not tremble as she touched the ritual items. She felt the collective gaze of Umudim upon her. Obinna watched, a smirk playing on his lips. He was confident. He had seen other women, accused and guilty, break down during this ritual. He expected Adaora to falter, to confess, to be consumed by the spiritual weight of the oath. His mother, Madame Ezine, nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on Adaora, waiting for the judgment she was sure would come. For them, this was not about truth. It was about Adaora's public humiliation and ruin. It was about restoring Obinna's bruised pride, about punishing the woman who had dared to outshine him. As Adaora finished her oath, a strange stillness fell upon the compound. Then the sky above Umudim began to change. Dark, heavy clouds rolled in swiftly, seemingly from nowhere, swallowing the afternoon sun. A deep rumble of thunder echoed across the land, but no rain followed. It was an unnatural sound, a disquieting pronouncement. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, their eyes wide with apprehension. Some said the gods were angry. Others whispered that the spirits were conferring, deliberating on the truth they had just witnessed. The tension was a living thing, coiling around them all. The following morning, dismissing the ominous signs of the previous evening, Obinna left Umudim. He was impatient to return to Aba, to spread the news of Adaora's supposed disgrace, regardless of the oath's immediate outcome in his eyes. He boasted to his relatives before departing. He would deal with Adaora later. He never made it back to the city. 3 days passed in anxious silence. Then the news arrived, carried by travelers, stark and chilling. Obinna had collapsed on the road near Isiala Junction. He was found frothing at the mouth. There were no wounds, no signs of a struggle. He was simply dead. The news of Obinna's sudden, strange demise ripped through Umudim like a shockwave. A profound silence fell upon the village, quickly followed by a rising tide of awe and fear. The elders gathered, their faces grim, their voices hushed. They spoke of the oath, of the unnatural storm, of Adaora's unwavering stance. The gods have spoken, one elder finally declared, his voice resonating with ancient authority. He swore falsely against the true daughter of this land. He brought a lie before the spirits. This is their justice. The verdict was swift, undeniable, and terrifyingly clear. The whispers about Adaora changed instantly. The slander, the suspicion, evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. She was no longer just the wealthy market woman from Aba. She was no longer the wife accused by her husband. She became Adaora, the woman protected by the gods. The woman whose innocence was so profound that the very spirits of Umudim had risen to defend her. Fear mingled with a newfound, deep respect in the eyes of the villagers. They looked at her now with a sense of wonder, as if she carried a sacred mark. The news of Obinna's demise spread through Umudim like the Harmattan wind. It traveled swiftly, hushed at first, then growing louder with each retelling. The villagers who had gathered to witness Adaora's oath now gathered again, their faces a mixture of shock and profound awe. The judgment of the gods was a fearsome thing to behold. It was swift. It was undeniable. Adaora remained in the small hut, a stillness around her. She listened to the sounds of the village, the changing cadence of their voices. The air itself felt lighter, cleansed. The shadows that had clung to her name for so long were finally, irrevocably banished by a power greater than any human malice. Internally, Adaora did not feel a surge of vindictive triumph. There was no celebration of her husband's death. Instead, a vast echoing sense of release settled within her soul. It was the feeling of chains, unseen but incredibly heavy, falling away after decades of bearing their weight. A burden she had carried since her youth. The burden of Obinna's cruelty, his mother's scorn, and society's judgment simply dissolved. She could breathe, truly breathe. The air filled her lungs with a purity she had almost forgotten existed. This was not joy, not yet. It was something deeper, the stark, quiet dawn of absolute liberation. Madame Ezine, who had arrived in Umudim, so certain of Adaora's downfall, was struck dumb. Her world, built on the premise of her son's superiority and Adaora's supposed worthlessness, had crumbled. The instrument of her torment upon Adaora was gone. The societal levers she pulled so expertly were now useless, even turned against her own narrative. People now looked at her with questioning eyes, perhaps even pity, or a touch of fear for the divine justice that had bypassed her and struck her son. Her sharp tongue was silent. Her reign of subtle terror over Adaora's life had ended with a terrifying, divine punctuation. When Adaora prepared to leave Umudim a few days later, her departure was different. She was no longer the accused woman, nor the fleeing wife. She walked with a quiet dignity, her head held high. The villagers watched her, their respect palpable. Some even bowed their heads slightly. She carried with her not just her few belongings, but the unspoken acknowledgement of the entire community. The earth of Umudim, which had drunk her childhood tears and later witnessed her false accusation, now seemed to bless her steps. The journey back to Abba was imbued with this new sense of peace, a quiet power settling into her very bones. Upon her return to Abba, Adaora found that news of the events in Umudim had traveled with astonishing speed. Whispers followed her through the vibrant aisles of Ari Aria Market, but they were different now. The tone was no longer tinged with suspicion or envy. Instead, there was awe, a touch of fear, and a profound respect. She was Adaora, the successful businesswoman, yes, but she was also Adaora, the woman whom the gods themselves had defended. This new dimension to her story added an almost mythical quality to her presence. Her stall in G-Line became even more of a landmark. Her business, Ugo Umudim, continued to flourish, its roots growing deeper, its branches spreading wider. The story of her vindication became intertwined with the narrative of her brand. It spoke of authenticity, of resilience, of an unshakable spirit. Customers felt they were buying not just goods, but a piece of that strength. Adaora, with her newfound internal peace, managed her expanding enterprise with even greater clarity and wisdom. She opened another warehouse. She hired more staff, especially young women she could mentor. Her quiet confidence radiated, inspiring loyalty and hard work from those around her. Her children, especially the older ones who understood the depth of their mother's suffering, embraced her with renewed love and fierce pride. Chimamanda and Kechi and the others saw their mother not just as a provider, but as a warrior who had fought invisible battles and won. Ifeanyi, though younger, would grow up hearing the full story, understanding the true legacy of his name, that nothing is impossible with God, and that his mother was living proof. Their home, once filled with tension and fear, became a sanctuary of peace and mutual respect, centered around Adaora's unwavering love. Adaora did not hoard her success or her newfound influence. She remembered the girl who had cried under the Iroko tree. She remembered the young wife desperate for a foothold. Quietly, without fanfare, she began to help other women in Aba. She offered advice to those starting small businesses. She sometimes provided small, interest-free loans. She shared her knowledge, her strength, becoming a silent pillar of support for many who faced their own struggles. She was weaving threads of hope into the fabric of her community, becoming a matriarch, not just of her family, but of a wider circle of aspiring women. Life for Adaora settled into a new, harmonious rhythm. The days were still busy with the demands of Ugo Umudim, but the frantic edge of survival was gone. It was replaced by a deep sense of purpose, of building something lasting, something good. She found joy in the simple act of creation, in the hum of her thriving business, in the laughter of her children. The scars of the past remained not as open wounds, but as faint lines testifying to battles fought and overcome. They were a part of her story, a reminder of the strength she had discovered within herself. Her connection with Umudim and with Igwe Chuka deepened. She visited her ancestral village more often now, not as an outcast, but as a revered daughter of the soil, a woman of substance and honor. Sometimes Chuka would seek her counsel, valuing her sharp mind and her unique perspective on matters affecting the community, especially concerning women and trade. Their friendship was a quiet bond of mutual respect, an echo of a youthful affection, transformed into a mature, supportive alliance. Umudim was no longer a place of painful memories alone. It was a source of strength, a place of belonging. She often reflected on her long journey, from the suffocating silence of Akamili to the harsh realities of Abba, through the trials of her marriage and the fire of public judgment. The girl who once felt invisible, who whispered her dreams only to the ancient trees, had found her voice. It was not a loud voice, but it was steady, and it was heard. The lessons she carried were not of bitterness or revenge. They were lessons of perseverance, the enduring power of integrity, and the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit when anchored in truth. Adaora's legacy was being written with every passing day. It was etched in the success of Ugo Umudim, a testament to her business acumen. It lived in the bright futures of her children, nurtured by her sacrifice and love. But most profoundly, her legacy resonated in the story of her life, a narrative of enduring unimaginable hardship and emerging not just unbroken, but transformed, empowered. The horizon before her was vast and open, bathed in the gentle light of a hard-won peace. Adaora, the woman who had survived the deepest shadows, now walked freely in her own radiant light.